Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Grunniblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Ginos, originator of the Zero G draft strategy, and contributor to Yahoo Fantasy. In this podcast, I'm going to go over the most puzzling players league-wide as submitted by the Apples and Ginos Discord server. Let's get it. All right, folks, welcome in. We've got lots of puzzling players to go through. Good to see some people in here already. New feeds and first time on the live feed. Nice stuff. Good to have you. Michael is in here first, and let's get to biz. You know what we do. All right. Well, what we're going to do today is talk through some puzzling players as we get submitted by the Apples and Ginos Discord server. If you're not in the Apples and Ginos Discord server, you should definitely get in there, and you can get your puzzling players submitted for next week's Puzzling Players live stream, and make sure that I talk about it there. And what else we're going to do is just take some live questions. Whatever people have, whatever's on top of mind, whatever's going on in the league. Maybe you guys can share with me some live updates and we can talk through some of that too. We're all here for it here tonight. Ricky's in here saying my Monday night ritual right here. That's what we like to see, Ricky. Glad to have you. All right. Why don't we dive right in with the first player that was widely requested in the Apples and Ginos Discord server, and that's Jake Neighbors. Jake Neighbors is having himself a little bit of a run here. And everybody wants to know, is this sustainable? Should we be all over this? Up on the top power play, up on the top line, Robert Thomas, Pavel Buchnevich, Jake Neighbors was the top line, and he's scoring. He's got 5 goals and an assist in his last 5 games. Still averaging just over 14 minutes for those 5 games, but definitely this is a player that people are sitting up and taking notice of right now. And for good reason, right? He's putting up goals. It's pretty hard to ignore. He had 2 goals in the last game against Chicago, skated 17:32 in that one, 3 shots, 4 hits, a couple of blocks. He was doing it all. So everybody wants to know what to expect from Neighbors moving forward, and rightfully so. You can see here across these 5 games, not great for shots, 193rd in shots per 60. The individual scoring chances 4 per 60 rank looks pretty interesting, though. 52nd. That's pretty solid stuff. Corsi 4 per 60, 140th, and 88th in scoring chances 4 per 60. It's okay, but definitely nothing to write home about. Overall, Jake Neighbors just, as a prospect, he was widely regarded as a pretty solid prospect, maybe not too exciting. Then caught a little steam after the draft, from what I've read anyway, and seemed like some people were getting a little bit more excited about him. And then he kind of went silent for a little bit, seemed like, just by virtue of the fact that he hadn't made the NHL yet, that maybe his development had stalled a little bit. He was the 26th overall pick in the 2020 NHL draft, so he's not it's not a super recent draft that we're talking about here, but definitely one of the more recent ones. All that to say, I'm interested, right? You have to be interested. When somebody does this, you have to be interested, and you have to sit up and take notice and see what they're doing. Especially, if you're in Bangers Cats and you see this guy hitting up a storm and putting up 3 shots in each of his last couple of games, then yeah, you're interested in that. And you're definitely interested in the fact that he's on the top line. So worth a speculative ad? Sure. Am I sold that Jake Neighbors is the second coming and he's just going to crush it from here on out? Absolutely not. So definitely, I think if you've got an open spot and you're really looking for someone that might turn into a long-term hold, and especially if you're in some sort of Bangers Cat situation, then Jake Neighbors fits that bill pretty nicely. But am I expecting, as a baseline expectation, am I expecting that from this point onward, Jake Neighbors is going to be, somebody who sticks in your roster for the rest of the season? No. We have to see more for sure. That being said, it's a nice run. He's getting the deployment right now. You may as well check in, snap him up while he's hot, and see where it goes from here, right? There's not a lot of harm in trying it out for a little bit and just seeing where it goes. All right, we'll go back to some comments. We got Toronto Dave in here saying hashtag 0G. Love to see you in here, TD. Craig asks Tarasenko. Yeah, Tarasenko, we've talked about Tarasenko a few different times, and I've kind of just been very lukewarm on the player. Just 2 assists his last 5 games here. You can see the underlying stats are not terrific. 204th in shots per 60, 320th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. On ice numbers a little better, 88th in Corsi, 4 per 60. But yeah, on the season, like 15 goal, 67 point pace, it's fine, but it's definitely not exciting. Averaging 16 minutes ish, a little bit less on the season. And the last lines are Tarasenko back down on the third line. I talked about this with Drake Batherson, that there's been times when Drake Batherson has been down on the third line, and that's affected his production. Now Tarasenko's down there, that's going to affect his production. So there is just this kind of situation where you have Claude Giroux, you have Drake Batherson, you have Vladimir Tarasenko, you have 3 natural right wingers there, and who's going to play in the top 6, right? Who's going to get the deployment? And when it's not Tarasenko, then he's left to play with, Rourke, Chartier and these guys, and that's just going to be really tough for him. So definitely think that Tarasenko's still got talent, but he needs deployment, and he's really, I don't think, gonna provide a ton of value if he's skating between 15 and 16 minutes a night. So I'm willing to roster him, but I'm definitely not viewing him as a must hold through all situations. Ottawa had that week where they had only the 1 game, and I don't have Tarasenko anywhere, didn't draft him anywhere, but I would have dropped him at that point for sure, because I don't think he's the caliber of player in this situation in Ottawa right now where you absolutely have to hang on to him for the full season, no matter what the cost. Michael's asking, is the real McDavid back? Yeah, I mean, what is it, 9 points in his last 2 games? Yeah, I'm thinking he's back. Gabriel says, what's up? Good to see you in here. CH 2.0 says, seems like the iron is hot to buy low on Boldy. Would you trade Svech for him? That's an interesting one. Andrei Svechnikov finally got off the Schneid goal and an assist in the games yesterday on Sunday. And Boldy has continued to be low. We talked about Boldy, Blake and I did on the last podcast, so go back and check that out if you're interested. He was widely requested for this one as well. And yeah, I'll reiterate just in brief what I said then. The underlying stats for Boldy still look terrific. 45th in shots per 60, 4th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60 over his last 5 games on the season. They still look terrific. On the season, he's 8th in the league in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. I have no concerns about Matt Boldy, the player. What I do have concerns about, actually, and maybe I'll use this moment as a chance to segue into some news and notes, but yeah, the Minnesota Wild fired their coach today. Dean Evason is out. It sounds like John Hines is going to come in, and I'm not super excited about that, if I'm being honest. Last time we saw John Hines, he was just doing okay things in Nashville, I guess, in terms of fantasy. There's that one season where everybody popped off. He was the coach for that season where Forsberg popped off, Duchesne popped off, Ryan Johansson popped off, obviously Yossi as well. But even then, he wasn't really giving anybody a ton of minutes. I looked at it this afternoon when I had a minute, and really, I think the most he played was Duchesne at 19 minutes. Forsberg was around 18 minutes. That's my biggest concern, really, with Matt Boldy moving forward, is that now that Hines is in town, both for Boldy and for Kaprizov, obviously the other most rosterable Minnesota Wild player, and the one that we have the most expectation for, is will John Hines continue to do what he did in Nashville and limit the minutes of his top players? That would be the most concerning thing for me with Matt Boldy. Is that enough to keep me from buying on Matt Boldy? No, it's not, because I love Matt Boldy and I think he's terrific. I think this is a guy who's going to score 100 points in a season at one point in the league. Probably not this year, just given the way that the year started out and the injury and everything, but I do think he has that level of potential in him. So love the player. A little bit concerned now with the firing and with the coaching hire that he might get limited somewhat just in terms of his deployment. In other news, we have apparently an update coming on the John Klingberg injury. Apparently, it has something to do with his hip. It's been a long-term issue, and there could go anyway as far as what I'm reading is, they're going to have some sort of clarity hopefully later this week, and we'll get an idea of what the issue is going to be there, how long it might affect him, and what that means, obviously, for our Morgan Riley shares in fantasy. Adam Fox was a full participant in practice today. That means he's probably trending towards playing on Wednesday when he's first eligible to come off of IR. So check that out. This was great timing. I just wrote an article for Yahoo, and in that article, I said, Erik Gustafsson, Monday, Wednesday, you can probably get him in for those games. He's been a point per game while Fox has been out. And so at least get these last two games, both on off nights from Erik Gustafsson, was kind of my thesis for the article there. And then it comes out, Fox is a full participant. He's good to go probably for Wednesday. So probably won't even get to see that thesis come to life. But such is life. Last thing here, Nathan MacKinnon under the weather. Looks like he's going to be a game time decision for the Colorado Avalanche, last I heard. So doesn't seem like it's going to be anything that keeps him out longer, but just a note there that you might see, the one actionable thing, I guess, that I'm doing is in a spot where I have Markstrom, Vasilevsky, and Georgiev all on one team, which is shocking for me. It was it's in the Apples and Genos Patreon League where everyone just plays zero G chicken, and I always end up saying, yeah, you know what, I'll take 10th round Vasilevsky or 10th round Georgiev or whatever it was, and then Markstrom I picked up when he was dropped. But yeah, regardless, I'm playing Markstrom over Georgiev, basically on the basis of this news that it seems like MacKinnon is trending towards probably not playing, and even if he does, he might be limited due to this illness. All right, getting back to the comments here. Last one says, "What's up, GOAT?" I don't think you're talking about me, my friend, but if you are, I'll definitely take that. Blake says, "Newsies." Yeah, buddy. Had to get in some more newsies even without you here. Wob says, "Got Boldy, Svechnikov, and Matthews. My last 3 weeks have been horrible." That is rough, just with the way that that's run out. It's a long season. You still got time. I wouldn't be completely panicking yet, but that is tough just to see that the way things have gone. For what it's worth, Matthews, his line did get shaken up. They moved Marner to the Tavares line, and they moved Nylander to the Matthews line. The other parts of that, Bertuzzi and Nyes, stayed the same. Nyes with Matthews and Bertuzzi with Tavares. So we'll see what that does, if that does anything for Matthews. He's just, he's been he's still near the league lead in goals, but yeah, obviously gone a little bit quiet the last little bit here. Ricky asks, "Is it worth holding on to Cousins to see if he and Buffalo get going? The waiver wire's thin. Not sure if it's preferable to stream that spot or if the potential is good enough to hold." Yeah, it really depends, which is not a great answer, I know. I don't think Cousins is a must hold. I'll say that. Definitely the last little stretch, the fact that he's been bumped off of the power play. You've seen Peterka get up there. You've seen Victor Olofsson get up there. Middlestad has seemingly entrenched himself in that spot. You got the looming prospect of Tage Thompson coming back at some point. Cousins just on pace for 17 goals and 39 points so far. Ice time's been up the last little bit. Obviously, you expect that with Thompson out, but just 1 goal in his last 5 games. Underlying metrics not looking great either. I don't think you have to hold Dylan Cousins. You'll have to kind of make that assessment for yourself. Like for myself, definitely if I'm looking at, 2 games of Dylan Cousins versus if I could have streamed in Kirill Marchenko and gotten 4 games of Kirill Marchenko this week, absolutely, I would have dropped Cousins for Marchenko for this week. So if that's the calculus that you're going through, then I definitely would drop Cousins in that. But if it's a relatively unexciting streamer who's only going to get me 1 more game than Cousins for the week, that's where I'm starting to think at least we've seen the proof positive with Cousins in the last year that he could get hot and he could go off and he could be this guy once again. Maybe in that situation, I'm choosing to hold on to Cousins. All right, let me get back into some of these players. We already talked about Neighbors. We already talked about Boldy, which means we have to talk about Alex Ovechkin and what's going on there. 3 goals in his last 5 games, averaging a tad under 20 minutes a night through those 5 games. 59th in shots per 60, 250th in individual scoring chances for per 60, which is mostly the concerning part with Ovechkin, is that the scoring chances are kind of down the last little bit, and on the season as well. On ice numbers, not very good either. 211th in Corsi 4 per 60, 254th in scoring chances 4 per 60. The Capitals have a big winning record on the season, which is kind of hilarious. But yeah, the last little bit, they've definitely trended downwards. And it's fair to wonder if Ovechkin at his age is still going to be all that this year. Once again, I had to look through, somebody asked me this question. Actually, one of the patrons asked me this question in the patron only section of the Discord server. If you're interested in getting guaranteed answers to all of your questions, then you can definitely check that out on the Apples and Genos Patreon. Link is in the show description, and you can get guaranteed answers for $5 a month if that's something you're interested in. But I did do a deep dive into Ovechkin. You know, when I look through, like, the shots per 60 is a little bit down from where he's been the last few years, but it's not like terribly down. The IPP is a little bit down. The scoring chances are a little bit more significantly down, and that's where I'm a little bit more worried. But in terms of the full season, like the last little bit, the Corsi 4 per 60, the scoring chances 4 per 60 have been down. But if you look at the entire season, it's actually one of the better seasons under the hood for his on-ice numbers in the last little bit. But the on-ice shooting percentage has been atrocious. So overall, Ovechkin definitely deserves better. There will be more points coming to him. Of that, I have no doubt. But it is fair to wonder with this iteration of the Capitals and who they are, is the shine coming off Ovechkin finally somewhat, where he's not just this absolutely elite level fantasy asset? That's a fair assessment to be making at this point, in my opinion. I think, honestly, though, it's still just as likely that he absolutely goes off at some point and Washington catches fire a little bit and he's able to once again elevate those around him. I'm still not putting that past Alex Ovechkin. I'm never going to doubt the man, basically, at this point. One of, if not the greatest goal scorer of all time. So definitely still in on Ovechkin. If there's a real buy low, like if someone is thinking that Ovechkin is totally washed, I definitely don't think he's totally washed. I'm just maybe adjusting my expectations a little bit from where I had them in the preseason. Last one says, yeah, I drafted Kaprizov and Ovi back to back. Ask me anything. Yeah, that's a rough look for sure. Kaprizov hopefully on his way out of that slump. Had a goal and assist in the last game, and hopefully the new coach doesn't hurt his minutes too much, and he's able to really build on this, because I do think Kaprizov, when all is said and done, is capable of a 100-plus point season. Let's keep rolling on to Troy Terry, who's just been atrocious. There's no way to sugarcoat this, really. Under 16 minutes, his coach has clearly got less and less faith in him. He's only got 1 assist his last 5 games. 362nd in shots per 60 is Troy Terry over his last 5 games. 364th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60. On ice numbers, not much better. On the season, pacing for 19 goals, 51 points. That's not what you expected from Troy Terry. This is really puzzling to me. I was actually a big proponent of Terry. I didn't end up with him anywhere, but that's not for a lack of trying. I was attempting to get Terry onto my team. Anaheim always has the off nights, as we all know. So it's nice to be able to have that player, a consistent player on your team who's consistently getting you off nights and that you don't have to worry about. But man, Troy Terry just really stinking up the joint the last little bit here. And yeah, I think you're totally warranted to drop him at this point if you need to. But at the same time, I do think that this is a player with a lot of talent who will eventually turn it around, unless this is an injury-related concern and there's something under the hood there in terms of an injury that we just don't know about. That's the only thing that could mean that this just continues. Otherwise, I do think Terry will get off the schneid at some point here. It does hurt, obviously, that Zegras is out. McTavish, he hasn't really played with. McTavish is playing out of his mind this season so far, one of the league leaders in individual scoring chances for. And so Troy Terry hasn't gotten a lot of that exposure. It's just really hard to roster Troy Terry right now. Anaheim's schedules are not as good as they usually are, so you don't have that added incentive right now. And so I do think it's warranted to drop Troy Terry if you have to. That being said, I do think that this is a player that I'm going to look to re-add at the smallest sign of resurgence, because I do think that this is a guy who has point per game potential within his range of outcomes as well. So yeah, take that for what it's worth. If you have to drop Troy Terry, if he is kind of that next guy up and you're like, yeah, like I want to hang on to everybody else, Troy Terry's the guy. I'm not going to blame you for doing it. But I am fairly confident that at some point this season, Troy Terry's going to get hot again and he's going to be worth rostering. So if you do drop him, I would say put him on your watch list immediately and just continue to monitor game to game how he's doing. And if he starts to trend back up, then snap him back up. Another guy who's been trending poorly is Patrik Laine. Just one goal in his last 4 games, under 14 minutes average time on ice. 212th in shots per 60, 136th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. The on ice numbers actually not too bad here. 36th in Corsi, 4 per 60, 86th in scoring chances, 4 per 60. Just checking the stat line here to see if we got anything out of Laine. No, he's got a couple shots, but no points so far. The Blue Jackets are surprisingly up 2-0 on Boston midway through the second as I'm recording this. So nothing for Laine so far. It is concerning, definitely, what's going on with Laine. It's, again, a little bit hard to fathom what exactly is going on. The scratch by Coach Pascal Vincent seemingly did not go over very well. And to be honest, I don't know that I blame Laine all that much for being a little bit nonplussed by that. And yeah, I think that we've seen this a little bit from Patrik Laine, right? A little bit mercurial player, and he goes into these prolonged slumps and has prolonged hot stretches as well. And so I wonder if this isn't one of those prolonged slumps, and how long can you really hang on to Laine? I said it last week and I'll say it again. I'm holding Laine through this week because of the schedule. Columbus has a perfect schedule this week, all off nights, all 4 games. I'm holding Laine all the way through this week, getting those games in my lineup basically for free, and then I'll reassess at the end of this week what I want to do with them. If there's still no movement, if the shots per 60 or scoring chances 4 per 60 still not moving, if he hasn't put up any points, then I'm absolutely going to be dropping Laine. Marco Rossi has 4 points in his last 5 games, averaging just under 17 minutes there. And it seems like that Minnesota had kind of settled on Rossi as the center for Kirill Kaprizov, but not putting Rossi on the top power play. Again, now we've got a new coach. Who knows what that does? It's hard to think that it really gets better for Rossi unless he does make it onto the top power play now. But I do kind of think that Boldy Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello is kind of the best 4 forwards that they have going there. Rossi would be the 5th, but probably you're not going to see a 5-forward power play in Minnesota. So where that leaves you is with Rossi probably just being a streamer. The underlying numbers here are not good despite the point production, 314th in shots per 60, 238th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, and about the same in the on-ice numbers. So despite that good deployment, his underlying numbers have not been great. He's on a 47-point pace for the season right now. That sounds about right to me, quite honestly, with what we're seeing. If this kind of deployment holds, where he's, between 16 and 17 minutes, and he's centering Kaprizov for a good chunk of the year, but it will obviously get moved around at some points. I think 47 points on the season is a reasonable expectation for Rossi as an ascending young player in the league. And I think, yeah, he'll be good for streaming, and he'll be bad when the Minnesota Wild have a bad schedule. Dave's in here saying Sam Benny just scored a power play goal from Barkov and Montour. That's what we like to see. Bennett was the next guy up on this and had just 1 goal in 5 games here, averaging close to 18 minutes. Underlying numbers were looking pretty solid for Sam Bennett, so glad to see him breaking through. Thanks for that update, Dave. That's great. Looks like Florida's up 3-0. Reinhardt's got a couple, and Bennett's got the one that you just mentioned there. And good to see Montour break through as well. He's on this list as well. Hadn't had a point yet through his first 4 games since returning from that big injury this offseason. So overall, I guess just to close on Bennett then is, I still think he's worth holding. in terms of the schedule here for Florida, they have the back-to-back here against Ottawa tonight and then Toronto tomorrow. So I was definitely holding Bennett through that, especially if I could get him in, obviously, for both of those nights, get him into the starting lineup for both those nights. I'm trying to hold Bennett. Quite honestly, I think that he's in a really good spot. I think Tkachuk is primed and ready to go off. All Tkachuk's underlying metrics look terrific, and Bennett has been his most constant 5v5 line mate over the last little bit. Is now on the top power play. Is now scoring goals on the top power play. So yeah, wheels up for Sam Bennett. I've been a big proponent of Bennett for a number of years now. Yeah, just hits, shoots, gets individual scoring chances for, does all the things that we here at Apples and Ginos love. So good to see that from Sam Bennett. I'm pretty stoked on him. And if you can fit him, so Florida has the Monday, Tuesday back-to-back here. Then they play on the heavy nights Thursday, Saturday. If you can get him in even for one of those games, then I think he's definitely worth holding through this week into next. Johnny Gaudreau finally catching fire here. He's got 5 points in his last 5 games, averaging over 20 minutes through that span. Underlying numbers still not good. 241st in shots per 60, 256th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. On ice numbers not much better. 186th in Corsi, 4 per 60, and 173rd in scoring chances, 4 per 60. On the season, still with these 5 points in 5 games, on pace for just 41 points on the season. Yeah, I do think that Johnny Gaudreau is going to have a really solid season when all is said and done. Last year, Columbus was just as much of a dumpster fire, and he still put up 73 points. I still think that that's kind of worst case scenario for Johnny Gaudreau as a point pace from here on out. John Carlson has 4 assists in his last 5 games here, averaging over 26 minutes time on ice. When I last talked about John Carlson, some of the underlying metrics were not looking so great. Since then, he's rebounded a little bit, up to 15th in shots per 60 amongst all defensemen in his last 5 games, 46th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. Still suffering from Washington as a whole not being terrific. As I mentioned with Ovechkin, the on-ice numbers for Carlson not really much better, 161st in Corsi, 4 per 60, and 166th in scoring chances, 4 per 60. All things told, though, I do think Carlson remains a terrifically talented offensive defenseman who's getting a tremendous amount of work. And so I do think that Carlson is probably still a pretty solid buy low. Moving on to Logan Cooley, who got elevated to the top line between Nick Schmaltz and Clayton Keller there. It's obviously a terrific spot for him to be in. Top line, top power play, but has just a goal and an assist for 2 points in his last 5 games, averaging just over 16 minutes. Underlying numbers at one point were starting to trend up for Cooley, was starting to shoot the puck a lot more, and now they've just gone right back down. 245th in shots per 60, 291st in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, and about the same in his on-ice numbers. Yeah, it's not looking good for Logan Cooley right now. And this is something that you'll hear me constantly refrain is rookies just go up and down, up and down, up and down all season, it seems, most of the year. So I'm really not expecting a whole lot from rookies in most cases, obviously Connor Bedard being an exception to that rule. But Logan Cooley, I feel like is going to go through these stretches. I'm still interested in him as a stream whenever he's available just because of this deployment. But I do think you're going to have to be a little bit vigilant with Logan Cooley. You're definitely never going to be in a spot where he's set and forget in your lineup. But I do think that there's every chance that he turns this around pretty quickly and he goes on a hot streak for a bit, but then he'll probably have another cold streak or 3 or 4 more cold streaks before the end of the year. So all things told, I think you just got to recognize that this is a really young player entering his first year in the league, and he's going to have a lot of ups and downs along the way. And so that makes him into a streamer level player for me and not somebody I'm looking to hold unless, it's some sort of keeper format. Quinton Byfield is a guy that obviously I've been a big proponent of just because of the untapped potential. He has the pedigree as a second overall pick behind Alexis Lafreniere in their draft year. Has 3 points his last 5 games, averaging close to 15 minutes. Has seen his time on ice come up as he got elevated to the top power play there in Los Angeles. Has obviously been a fixture on the top line alongside Kempe and Kopitar for quite some time. 294th in shots per 60, 236th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, 159th in Corsi, 4 per 60, and 203 in scoring chances, 4 per 60. Underlying numbers, not great for Quinton Byfield at this point, but still on pace for 69 points on the season, which is pretty nice. So Quinton Byfield, from this point onward, LA has this kind of weird schedule this week where they have a pair of off nights, but they're kind of spread out, and those are the only two games they play this week. Play on Wednesday against the Capitals, and then not again till Sunday against Colorado. In a schedule like that, I'm not going to fault you if Quinton Byfield is the bottom of your lineup and you decide you're going to move on. But I've said it before that I think this is just a player who's just scratching the surface of what he's going to be able to do in the league. A lot of people like to talk about how these bigger players take a longer time to establish themselves in the league. Maybe that's the case for Byfield. I haven't done any of those studies myself, so I'm not going to comment on the veracity of those statements that people make, but I think that you just see it in the talent of Quinton Byfield. He's had stretches where his underlying metrics have really backed it up as well. And so I'm just pretty interested to see what Quinton Byfield can be. And I mean, top line, top power play, right? It doesn't get much better than that. The overall minutes are really the concern. If this was a situation, if he was on any other team other than LA and the top line, top power play meant that he was getting 20 minutes a night, then you'd be like stoked about Quinton Byfield. Like, just imagine if he was in, say, like in Winnipeg and he was playing alongside Scheifele and Connor on that top line and top power play, then you'd be through the moon about Byfield getting probably 20 minutes a night at that point. So you just have to be cognizant of what the situation is in LA. It's really good for being efficient because it's a terrific team and a really well-run team, but his just total opportunity is going to be held down by the fact that they roll the lines and they even roll the power play a little bit more than a lot of teams do. So take all those factors into account, but recognize that Byfield has some of the highest upside in the game and factor that into your decision as well. Mika Zibanejad has 4 points in his last 5 games, showing some signs of life after having just a putrid start to the season. Still only on pace for 61 points on the season so far. 138th in shots per 60, 170th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60 over these last 5 games. That's not something you're used to seeing from Zibanejad by any stretch, but he has shown some signs of turning the corner here the last little bit. And so you really hope that that's going to continue here. He had these kind of 2 great games, 4 shots, then had 0 shots against Boston, but still had an assist. Now against Buffalo here, he's got a full-on cardio session going where he's got nothing on the stat line, has played 14:30 through 2 periods, but has contributed absolutely nothing. It's definitely been up and down with Zibanejad so far. My personal take is I don't think there's anything wrong with Zibanejad. It's a really cold start. And that is somewhat concerning in and of itself. But overall, you've just seen over the past couple of years, at the very least, that Zibanejad is really capable of providing these point per game plus seasons. And I think that if I had to lay money on it, point per game plus from this point onward for Zibanejad, I'd take the over. So take that for what it's worth. But I do think that Zibanejad is fully capable of getting back to his former heights. Brent Burns is an interesting one. Carolina in general is just an interesting one, but Burns himself has 2 goals, 3 points in his last 5 games, averaging just over 20 minutes a night. 20th in the league in shots per 60 amongst defensemen in this 5-game stretch, 2nd in shot attempts per 60. On-ice numbers look terrific, as they're wont to do in Carolina, 7th in Corsi, 4 per 60, 19th in scoring chances, 4 per 60. He did obviously take over the top power play. We've seen a couple of scratches now for Tony DeAngelo, so that experiment might finally be over. And if that's true, then it's really wheels up for Brent Burns, and I'd be very interested in acquiring him at that point, if that's indeed what's going to happen from here on out. It might honestly be well worth acquiring him just in the off chance that is what continues to happen from here on out. So for those reasons, I'm pretty in on Brent Burns, actually, and I'm actively looking to acquire Brent Burns. I talked about this a few weeks ago. and it still holds true for me today. I'm actively looking to add Brent Burns to my squads. JT Miller and Jake Gensel were paired together in by one commenter in the Apples and Geos Discord server, asking if they could really sustain what they've been doing so far. Miller has 3 goals, 6 points in his last 5 games. Gensel has 1 goal, 4 points in his last 5 games, both skating around 20 minutes a night. Miller has, I guess what I would call good, not great underlying numbers, 175th in shots per 60, but 64th in individual scoring chances for per 60. He's always been a little bit less of a shooter, but a very efficient converter. 35th in Corsi 4 per 60, 43rd in scoring chances 4 per 60. And obviously, you know what he's been able to do on the season so far. He's got 33 points in 22 games, pacing for 49 goals and 123 points. Terrific stuff, obviously, from JT Miller there. Underlying numbers are really not that great. This is actually a pretty good stretch for him and are raising the averages on the season for him in terms of the underlying numbers. So I do think that regression is inevitably coming for JT Miller. What that regression actually looks like is up for debate, but, you know, I still think in the end he's probably a 90-ish point player from here on out. If I had to put a guess on the point pace from here on out, that's probably about where I'd land. Definitely not 123. That's definitely high. The 80% IPP is going to come down. The 26% shooting percentage going to come down. The 17.7% on ice shooting percentage definitely going to come down. So take that for what it's worth. Still think JT Miller's obviously definitely worth rostering. And not only rostering, but definitely worth hanging on to. I've been trying desperately to sell my JT Miller shares for Matthew Tkachuk shares. I would still do that in a heartbeat. If that's something you can do, then I wholeheartedly sign off on doing that. Jake Gensel, honestly been one of the best seasons he's ever put up in terms of the underlying numbers. 4th in Corsi 4 per 60, 6th in scoring chances 4 per 60, 10th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60. All that's translating to a 94-point pace. And honestly, this feels kind of sustainable for Jake Gensel to this point. I think 94-point pace is actually pretty sustainable given what he's been able to do. First in the league in both individual scoring chances 4 per 60 and Corsi 4 per 60 over the last 5 games is Jake Gensel. Montour, I'll talk about. Jersey I talked about with Blake on the pod yesterday, so go back and check that out if you're interested there. Montour, I just want to say I have no concerns about Brandon Montour, okay? He's got a point in the game tonight. Love to see that. Hopefully there's more coming. I've got no concerns with Montour. Already getting the minutes. The points will come. Wyatt Johnston was one more that was requested by the Apples and Geos Discord server. 2 goals, 3 points in his last 5 games, averaging about 17 minutes a night. 29th in the league in shots per 60. Really excited about what Wyatt Johnston can be, but he's obviously still held down there just by the presence of their stars and by the fact that they really don't lean on anyone too much in terms of the deployment. So I think that Johnston, who's on a 69-point pace, which is nice, can definitely hang on to something around that. Might take a slight under on that on the season-long total, but definitely think Johnston absolutely worth hanging on to for the rest of the season. Ricky asks, do you have the same concerns about Pettersson as you do JT Miller, or is Pettersson more sustainable? It's a fair question. Pettersson has obviously kind of tailed off the last little bit with just the 2 assists in his last 5 games. Underlying numbers kind of reflect JT Miller's a little bit. Not too hot in terms of the shots or the individual scoring chances for. The Corsi 4 per 60 and scoring chances 4 per 60 still looks okay, though. Pettersson on pace now for 108 points on the season. Underlying numbers, not terrific. Also has the exact same 17.7% on ice shooting percentage, but I do think he has room to improve the IPP a little bit. Overall, I don't think my thesis on Pettersson has changed all that much. I think he's probably an 85 to 90 point player rest of season. So in the same range as Miller, just in terms of sheer point production. Yeah, I think that's probably about where I'm going to land. I think Pettersson can probably start shooting a little more at some point. He's shown the ability to do that in this past year, but Definitely, I think he's been a little bit too hot, and what you're seeing right now in these last 5 games is probably just a little bit of that regression coming through. Craig asks Eli Tolvanen versus Byfield. That's an interesting question. I'll pull up Tolvanen's numbers. He has 5 points in his last 5 games, averaging over 17 minutes. And the underlying stats did look good for a minute there, but have now started to come back down to earth. The problem with Tolvanen or anyone from Seattle is that you really can't trust the deployment. They're going to use one power play more this week and then the other power play unit more the next week. They're going to use one line more this week and different line more the next week. And I think that Tolvanen is just a little bit of casualty of the system there. He's on a 56-point pace for the season. I think he can sustain that, but I wouldn't really take the over on that. And so probably if you're just talking about a person to hold in your lineup, then I'm taking Byfield just because I think the ceiling there is so much higher. I've got Andrei Kuzmenko written down here just because of the recent scratchings. Yeah, whenever you get these scratchings, it's really hard to obviously be interested or excited about that player's potential long term for your fantasy rosters. I'm willing to drop Kuzmenko for sure. I'm willing to add him back if and when he's back and playing with the stars that they have there in like top power play, top line, all these things that Kuzmenko has typically been when he's been on the ice. So definitely willing to roster him when he's playing there, but I'm not going to hang on to him if he's going to be getting scratched for games here or there or constantly. So I'll probably wait to see what happens for the next Vancouver game at this point and just see what happens in that game. And then if he's still not going to be, if he's scratched for a third straight game, absolutely cutting bait. There's no way you could pay me to hang on to him. Honestly, if I did have him anywhere, which I don't, after the second scratch, I probably would have dropped him right then. All right, folks. Well, I think that's going to be all that we've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, which is a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band They're There for supplying the music for this podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. That's it, folks. Much love.